Hello everyone! Have you ever felt like you know everything? We're not talking about being an expert in nuclear physics, writing sonnets like Shakespeare, or being able to quote Wikipedia by heart. We mean the feeling that your worldview is complete and very accurate. But what if we told you that some of the things you think are real are just a myth? And we have proof. Aren't you afraid to discover the truth? Then let's get started. Great Wall of China. One of the wonders of the world, a monument that everyone should visit, a masterpiece of ancient architecture and a true achievement. The Great Wall of China is all that and much more. Its length is 21,196 kilometers, and it was built many centuries ago. It is believed that the Great Wall of China can be seen even from space. However, NASA claims that the monument is barely visible from low Earth orbit, and only in perfect climatic conditions. In general, just like any other large man-made object. Some people believe that the Great Wall of China can be seen from the surface of the moon with the naked eye. This idea first appeared in 1754, that is, long before people could see the Earth from our satellite. In fact, the width of the Great Wall as seen from the moon would be the same as a human hair seen from a distance of 3 kilometers. That is, you wouldn't see it. Therefore, anyone who wants to see the wall with their own eyes should travel to China, and not to the moon. But soon there will be nothing to see here. Although parts of the wall north of Beijing are nearby tourist destinations have been preserved and even repaired, in many other places the wall is in very poor condition. The stones of the walls have been used to build houses and roads, as well as simply being stolen by vandals. Some of the bricks borrowed by the villagers were carved with Chinese words. According to scientists, these are invaluable historical artifacts. However, they are sold for $7 or $8 in the village markets. A 2012 report from the National Cultural Heritage Administration said that 22% of the Great Wall of China had simply disappeared, and the situation is getting worse every year. Many sections are made of clay rather than bricks and stone, making them more vulnerable to erosion. Winds, rain, tourists, and locals are some of the causes of the rapid destruction of the wall. NESSIE'S photo. Perhaps one of the most famous legends is the story of the Loch Ness Monster. The first recorded mention of the mysterious creature living in the waters of Loch Ness dates back to the 6th century AD. The life of Saint Columba speaks of the saint's triumph over an aquatic beast in the river Ness. A little medieval folklore and a pinch of Celtic legends, and now there are people who claim to have seen the monster with their own eyes. Once cameras became popular, there was documentary evidence too. The so-called surgeon's photo is the first image of the creature's head and neck. It was believed to have been taken by Dr. Robert Kenneth Wilson. The photograph complemented the image of the prehistoric reptile that people had at that time. According to the photographer, the photo was taken by accident. Wilson said he was looking at the lake when suddenly he saw a monster. The man immediately grabbed his camera and took 4 photos. Only 2 photographs turned out well, but only one of them became known around the world. It is still often used as proof of Nessie's existence, as it was taken in 1934, when Photoshop did not yet exist. For 60 years, the photograph was considered authentic, although many still doubted the existence of Nessie. But in 1994, the truth was revealed. It turned out that the creature was a toy submarine built by Chris Sperling, son-in-law of Marmaduke Wetherell. The latter was publicly ridiculed by his employer, the Daily Mail newspaper, after he discovered some Nessie footprints, which turned out to be false. To get revenge on the newspaper, the man and his accomplices made a model of Nessie, took several photographs of it, and sent them to the editorial office. And the newspapers bought it, as well as the rest of the world. Pyramids and slaves. Ancient Egypt is a subject that always draws the attention of both scientists and ordinary people, regardless of age. You can easily find a teenager passionate about the pharaohs or an old woman who knows everything about the pyramids. Speaking of pyramids, most people believe that the main manpower in their construction were slaves. In the end, to build something as big as a pyramid, you need a lot of people willing to work day and night, maybe even without weekends and holidays. No wonder 19th century scientists believed that the pyramids were built by slaves. Nevertheless, in the 20th century, century, it was thought that only a small part of society worked on the site. More precisely, several thousand professional workers and architects. How could they create these huge structures? It's a mystery. In reality, however, the entire healthy population of the country worked on the pyramids. In other words, one part of society built the pyramids while the other participated as well. For example, they supplied the builders with everything they needed, prepared food for them. Some people were involved in security. Some of them participated in long expeditions to obtain stone and metal. No country in the world would have had enough slaves to do it all at once. Salem witch trials. Stories about witch hunts are always depicted in the same way: the accusation, the unfair trial, and then the terrible death at the stake. Apparently, this was their way to get rid of evil. Perhaps one of the most famous witch trials is that of Salem. It is far from being the only one in America, but it was this series of hearings, held between February 1692 and May 1693, that became the most famous. That's because it was the deadliest witch hunt in North American history. It is also known as one of the most famous cases of mass hysteria. More than 200 people were charged, 30 convicted, 19 of whom were executed, and at least 5 died in prison. And they were all people who had committed no crime. But if you imagine that there were many bonfires in that place, then you are wrong. The condemned were hanged. Piltdown Man. On 15th of February 1912, Arthur Smith Woodward, keeper of geology at the Natural History Museum, received a letter from amateur archaeologist Charles Dawson. He informed Woodward of the discovery of part of a massive skull of a humanoid creature in a gravel quarry at Piltdown. In May, Woodward began exploring the site and as a result concluded that the fragment belonged to a still unknown ancient man. Just so you understand, such a find is a real treasure for any scientist. You don't find human remains every day, not to mention a completely new human being. Woodward and Dawson continued their excavations, finding more evidence of the existence of the animal Piltdown Man. More skull fragments, a jaw with 2 teeth, an assortment of animal fossils, and primitive stone tools. It was a real sensation. Woodward did a reconstruction of the skull, and on November 21st, 1912, the Manchester Guardian newspaper published an article about the remarkable discovery in Sussex. The material said that the creature to which the skull belonged probably lived 1 million years ago, and that it was the first human ancestor found in England. The discovery of the Piltdown Man was soon announced to the world community. The discovery, which was intended to be the missing link in the evolution between the ape and the modern man, caused a sensation. We'll not go into boring details and will only tell you that the Piltdown Man could have changed many ideas about evolution. Even the most skeptical scientists recognized the credibility of the discovery. But unfortunately, it turned out to be false. The bones were artificially aged and painted with the color of quarry gravel, and the teeth that actually belonged to an orangutan had been slightly ground to make them look more human. The Piltdown Man consisted of the bones of a modern man and an orangutan, also modern. On November 21st, 1953, the Natural History Museum in London officially announced that the sensational discovery was just a hoax. Viking horned helmets. How do you imagine Vikings? They have beards, round shields, probably axes or swords, and of course, horned helmets. And the bigger the horns, the better. Surely the fierce warriors of the North showed their toughness in this way. However, historians who carefully examined the tombs of the Vikings insist that helmets with horns have never been found. Seriously, not one. Despite finding well-preserved burial sites, archaeologists have only found one Viking helmet, and it had no horns. But not because they'd fallen off. They weren't there in the first place. After all, in battle, these elements would not only be useless, but even dangerous. A helmet with horns is much easier for the enemy to grasp. So where did this strange image of the Vikings come from? It is believed that the Scandinavian romantic artists of the second half of the 19th century are responsible for the horns. For example, the Swedish artist August Malmström represented his Viking ancestors with horned helmets. In 1876, inspired by his paintings, Carl Emil Doppler created helmets with golden horns for the characters of Wagner's opera The Ring of Nibelung, and so they remained in history. Heavy armor. Since we're talking about helmets, let's pay attention to other details of a knight's equipment. It is believed that the knight's armor is something like a very, very heavy tin that protects the body. However, the stories of knights who could not get into the saddle without the help of a squire, or who could not get up on their own if they were knocked off the horse, are nothing more than a myth, except in cases where they had been hit in the head. The knight's outfit, from the first mesh armor to the plaque armor that would come later, allowed enough free movement to fight the enemy. The total weight of the armor generally did not exceed 30 kilograms, and it was very evenly distributed throughout the body. This made the armor feel lighter than it actually was. By the way, the weight of modern soldiers' equipment is no less, and sometimes even greater than that of medieval knights, and no one would call soldiers clumsy. 4th of July. Independence Day in the United States is celebrated on the 4th of July to commemorate the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It's a special historical document in which the British colonies of North America declared their independence from Great Britain. But in fact, it's a little more complicated than that. The 4th of July does indeed have something to do with the Declaration of Independence. It was the day the Declaration was adopted, but not signed. Despite the prevalence of this myth, in which even American citizens themselves believe, historians categorically reject the signing of the Declaration on the 4th of July. They claim that most delegates signed the Declaration on August the 2nd, but that's not a good enough reason to postpone the holiday, is it? That's all for today. See you soon!